Hi there, and thanks for checking out this video. My name is Terry Four, and I'm the Director of Development at the Center for Open Science. If you know anything about COS, you know that one of the foundations of our mission to make science and scholarship more transparent, more reproducible, and ultimately more trustworthy is the Open Science Framework, or OSF. OSF is an open source, free to use research management and collaboration platform that enables open practices across the entire life cycle of a research project. Researchers from all around the world and in all kinds of fields like psychology, neuroscience, chemistry, ecology, physics, cancer biology, political science, and even computer science and engineering all use OSF to do things like pre-register their experiments, post preprints, share their materials, their data, their protocols, and version control their code development all in one place. In fact, more than 900,000 unique registered users have created an OSF account and rely on it as a trusted open research resource. Since we introduced it in 2013, OSF has been maintained almost exclusively by our engineering team here at COS. While we've got some great, talented technologists on our staff who are my colleagues, we realized that if OSF was truly going to meet the needs of the wide range of research communities that use it, we needed to incorporate those communities into its continued development. So we've launched a program called the OSF Open Source Ecosystem, which in its most basic sense is a mechanism for us to work directly with research software engineers who have developed or are currently developing awesome tools and add-ons that they and their colleagues use in their particular fields of research. OSF has an open API, which means it can connect and operate with other software tools. This is really important if you're a researcher and you've got your data stored in one place, a repository, and you're using another software tool to analyze the data and another software tool to create an image or a visualization of your data analysis, and yet another tool to try to share all of that data and the materials with other researchers in your field. That's what's so awesome about OSF is that it connects all of those tools together and lets you manage your research project all in a central location. Essentially, what we're doing with this open source ecosystem program is to enable more researchers to connect more of the tools they use to OSF, so it's even easier for them to conduct and share their research openly. In this video, you'll hear more about why all of this is so important, and you'll also hear from some of our partner researchers about the tools they connected to OSF through our first cohort of projects that just wrapped up. But before I turn it over to my colleagues, what you need to know from me is that we need resources to continue working with researchers and making this progress toward more interoperability, as we call it. My fundraising team here at COS is approaching all kinds of folks, from government funding agencies to private philanthropy funders, and even some industry partners in our network. But we're taking an all of the above approach because we know that it isn't just researchers themselves or others who are directly involved in research who benefit from more trustworthy, more reproducible, more verifiable science. It's everybody, truly. So you're watching this video, and whether you represent a public funder, a private philanthropy, a company that's interested in investing in open science, or even if you're just an individual who wants to see science and scholarship done in a better way, and can make a small donation of $10, $15, $25, whatever the amount is, you can help us make sure this program keeps going strong. And those small donations do add up, and they combine to make a difference. Please visit cos.io/OSE. That's OSE as an open source ecosystem, cos.io/OSE for more information on this program, and contact me at giving@cos.io to reach my team if you're in a position to support us. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you'll be part of this exciting new effort.
OSF has also always had an open API. And so that's also just part of sort of our founding and the things that we wanted to offer and make available to all of our stakeholders. And it did mean that it made it fairly straightforward for others to start to build tools that pushed and pulled from OSF, content to support sort of the in and out workflows connected to OSF. And so we did that, and then it did take off. There have been a number of different examples over the years where different tools have been developed by PIs, labs, or other sort of research communities to work with OSF projects. So some examples of those are like the R community. Researchers use R a lot in their analyses, and so the community developed sort of a package that would work with OSF, that would pull files from an OSF project, run an analysis through R, and then push back results. And this helped enable some of those end-to-end workflows around sort of data and data analyses that were transparent and actually reproducible. And those are some of the things that are, very important when you're trying to do rigorous research in an open and transparent way. Another example actually that reminds me of a year ago when we held a similar event and we had Lenny Titelman from Protocols on, just talking about how they use the OSF API to put into their application a way for researchers to sync their protocols to their OSF projects. So again, just the ability to be more transparent and reproducible in their workflows by showing how maybe the data outcomes or preprints that might be on OSF were related to a protocol that was part of the specifics of a research process. So I think all of this sort of demonstrates how OSF was starting to enable more of an open source ecosystem, but hadn't had necessarily the resourcing to go back and really fill in some of the gaps that over the years we had learned we needed to address to make it possible to support an ecosystem where research workflows for rigorous and transparent and open research were possible, helping sort of adopt those open science practices in a more efficient and less burdensome way. When tools can talk to each other, it really lowers that burden. And so that was something we saw as a need and saw this NSF POSE program as an opportunity to help support and enable. For me, lifecycle open science really just means being transparent and rigorous throughout your research endeavors. Again, trying to be as broad as possible in what domains of research could participate. I think all can in different ways. It may mean different things for different communities. And so therein lies sort of part of the challenge that we're trying to address through this open source ecosystem. It ultimately means that for a given research project or study, all the plans and outputs such as data, materials, protocols, code, whatever outcomes come are findable sort of in a publicly accessible platform and are all linked together. So that means that the plan for the research is shared, and it's something that the team that's working on it can collaborate and be open and transparent about how they sort of develop their plans. And as the plan is carried out, the outputs, various outputs that could happen throughout the course of that work are transparent and somewhat traceable, meaning, I can follow along even if I'm not part of it. I can understand sort of what you did under what conditions or constraints to sort of understand a piece of knowledge that you're extracting. And then at the end, where, hopefully some outcomes of that work are published and are transparent, that's something that then is all linked together in a way that, like, if I arrive at your work through GitHub and finding your code, it's something that I am interested in. I can also then follow to where the preprint might be, or the data, or something else. Maybe your research is just code development, and that's also fine, but it probably gets some other type of publication or translation work that then is linked and connected. So all that to say, I think it's a broad term that, again, in the context of a specific type of research endeavor, it means different things, but ultimately it's transparent, it's traceable, it's fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and it's all kind of linked together in a way that no matter what entry point you take at what point in time of the life cycle of that work, you can understand what else has occurred or is planned or is occurring to keep track of all of those pieces. For OSF specifically, one sort of aspect of how we're supporting that is really to think about being a place where those different steps in the life cycle could occur on different tools. I don't think realistically there is one tool that can solve it all. I've been a researcher myself. I know there are a number of different instruments and platforms that are utilized sort of from the start to the end of all that goes into what I described earlier as sort of that life cycle. And so I think to help support researchers and stakeholders who are sort of consuming that research and being able to follow that along, I think we want to enable a way in which those different platforms and tools can talk to each other and share sort of the discrete outputs and their metadata in an interoperable way. So I guess some examples of that within OSF is like, for example, the integration with like the Zotero libraries. So it means that you can organize and share your citations or literature reviews in an easy way for others to be able to access when they're looking at maybe your study plan or your preprint or something. So it's just the traceability, I think, and the metadata and interoperability between those platforms. Similarly, we have some integrations with different file storage. Again, in the process of planning and collaborating and organizing your research, I think there's a number of different artifacts that occur in a storage solution there. And so being able to easily just connect right into that instead of the download and the upload and then, different versions and like all of those things. It's like right there synced up and easy for someone else to access and follow along. And then, similarly, the data. So one integration is with our team at Dataverse, a partner that we work with. And so you can connect that data that's stored on Dataverse with very rich metadata directly into OSF. So it can connect to your research plan or your code on GitHub. There's a number of different integrations, again, meant to help reduce that barrier and burden for researchers to have to find all these things and upload and download things in different ways. And I think we have done a fairly good job of trying to support that need and be interoperable across the life cycle. But I think it is my sincere desire to push that even further. And so just to kind of shout out to NIH's Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, GRAY, where we've gotten the opportunity to collaborate with other generalist repositories, Dryad, Zenodo, Dataverse, Figshare, Vivly, Mendeley Data, they're all there. And what we've done together is develop some standards for metadata to enable that interoperability across different tools. And so I hope we can continue to push on that, where we could connect our outputs that we might have to each other in a meaningful way that helps reduce that burden for researchers, just to enable that life cycle as we were talking about. I see the values of open science and open source as highly aligned. In fact, I actually find it really difficult to see a future, sort of in my mind, where we have open and transparent research that's not reliant on some open source technology and tools. I think open science gives us the opportunity to break down barriers, accelerate discovery, improve rigor of our research and trust in our research, and democratize that access to all of that knowledge. And yet I find that sometimes the pace of that discovery and dissemination can be slowed often by sort of the siloing of tools, the lack of sustainable infrastructure to empower all of that work, and then the unequal access of knowledge, which again is one of the principles they both share of inclusivity and collaboration. So I feel like the ecosystem around open scholarship, open science is an opportunity to really co-create with communities that's premised on those principles that underpin both open scholarship and open source development, but I would put a third one in there, which is public goods. I think that both of those sort of principles are shared with public goods as well. And the open source communities that are supporting open scholarship as well really could help shift the norms to the more open and transparent practices in research. And I think that it really does bolster the transparency, the collaboration, sort of the flexibility needed, like you were sort of saying, that within different domains of research, there's going to be unique and different needs. But the beauty is when we build in a modular sort of open source way, that's not siloed and kept away from those other communities. And a lot of times there are shared things. There are things that are building blocks that others can utilize and build from or take from. And so I think that's the opportunity here to just continue to sort of foster that type of environment. I also think that, some of the things that you were kind of getting at the beginning is I think when there's a shared sort of investment, collective support for this type of open infrastructure as a public good, we all benefit. There's shared benefit, but it also reduces the costs, right? The cost to maintain that and support that ongoing. So it's certainly more cost effective. It is by design then more inclusive, I think, when you have that transparency and collaboration as a key component. And I personally really am part and partial to this free from lock-in kind of experience for researchers. I think that's really, really critical and something open source really enables.
One of the things that we did was we went out and we talked to open source experts. So anybody who had open source experience, contributors, leaders in open source communities. We also talked to people who we've worked with in the past, open source people that we've worked with, or different projects or integrations that have tried to work with us in the past, and looked for pain points, look for things that we were not doing well. I think part of the opportunity of doing this is that you get to take a really hard look in the mirror on what are the things that you're doing well already and the things that you're not. Because if you don't do that, then you're really not going to grow. One of the things that I want to make note of is that this isn't like a traditional award, like a grant award where somebody applies and you say, that's a great idea, here you go, and you're on your way. It's kind of more hands-on than that. And the second point that I want to make a note of is that you're selecting people as much as you are selecting a project. The goal with these projects and these awards that we were giving out is that we wanted people who would be a pillar of the community that we are trying to build. So we wanted people who are going to be involved, people who not only are passionate about open source, but passionate about what we're building here as well. So there's kind of multiple layers to that rubric that we're kind of evaluating and creating people. And I don't actually need to go into details about each one of those merits. So whether that's value to the OSF users, value to the OSF itself, our organization, anything like that, we don't have to go into too much about that, but there's multiple layers to this process. So once we had kind of honed in on who we wanted to work with, it wasn't as simple as us saying, yeah, absolutely, come on in. We actually had these award winners come in and meet with our engineering team in like an ARB review process where we bounced ideas back and forth of each other. There was some honing of these ideas to make sure that their ideas fit with our system. And it was the beautiful thing about that is not only were you focusing in on what that project was going to look like, we were also creating connections and relationships. People were actually getting faces to names before we got started. I'll pass it off to Fuda because he can talk a little bit more about some of the different types of integrations that we had and even how we were changing our definitions of integrations as they were kind of coming along.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I'll talk about the two projects that we don't have representatives from, as I'm sure Josh and Jason will be able to describe their projects better than I can. Yeah. So the first project that we supported was this PDF export of OSF projects. This was in collaboration with the University of Manchester. The project aims were to allow users to export their OSF projects, their information off of the OSF and into a PDF form. And so this ability to export OSF objects has been a long requested feature. This is to help researchers with archiving, reporting, audits, and many other things here. So this is a great first step in addressing this gap in our functionality. And the University of Manchester teams created a new tool that uses our API to get the project's data from the OSF, export it into a PDF form with the project's metadata, wiki content, file and component metadata, as well as other important information. And so they have this tool currently hosted online, the University of Manchester does, on a Streamlit app, and it's also available to download through PyPy, and this is a Python package repository. This is a new tool, and we hope that we can develop this tool further with our open source community to allow users to export their OSF content into other formats like ROCrate or Baggit, and I'm sure there are plenty of other formats that folks want supported depending on what type of research they're doing. The other one that I would like to talk about is expanding our add-ons ecosystem to support Azure Blob Storage. This is an extension of an existing partnership that was alluded to earlier with some of our partners in Japan called NII, or the National Institute of Informatics. So they have an instance of the OSF that they host called Gakunin RDM, and that caters to Japanese institutions and researchers. And they've developed support for storage integrations, or what we call add-ons, that the current OSF does not, and among many other things that they've developed as well. So these storage integrations or add-ons are how users are able to access their Google Drive or Dropbox content on the OSF. And yeah, just to zoom out a little bit and just to kind of give some context on some of the engineering efforts that went to support this project. Daniel alluded to this earlier, but we had some ongoing effort to help streamline the OSF's code, and we rewrote how the OSF communicates to these external services like Google Drive, GitHub, and other services. And so we separated this code for communicating these services out of the main OSF.io codebase and into its own repository. And we created a new service called Gravy Valet. And the name I do not take any responsibility for this name. It's a play on words from one of our existing services. So this project with NII serves as a bit of a test bed for us to work with external contributors, to add new storage providers to the OSF, and hopefully in the future we can work with other partners to integrate other storage solutions using Gravy Valet.
Researchers of any discipline have to deal with the fact that when we do things in this open way, it does add a little bit of extra work. And we have to do things like manage our data sets and make them available, write good documentation about them, and so forth. What DataPipe is trying to provide is sort of a specialized use case for behavioral researchers who are running experiments online, where that data is automatically sent to an OSF component as soon as it's created. The thing we're trying to address here is sort of a lack of maybe follow through, not in any intentional way, but it can be another step at the end of a long research process to get the data all ready to go. And so this is just a way to make sure that that happens automatically, and in some ways make it even easier than to not do it, because you can just rely on OSF and DataPipe to handle the data side of things, and you don't have to worry about storing things in a particular specialized way. When we interact with websites, computers, there's lots of things that we are doing on those devices that are relevant to questions in psychology and cognitive science and economics and so forth. And so a lot of behavioral research has started using the internet as a way to sample from much larger populations than you can sample from if you're conducting all your research in a laboratory environment. The tools that I've been working on for a long time are related to making this sort of easier and more accessible to folks. And one of the problems that you have to solve when you're doing that is, where does your data go? If you're collecting data from people on the internet, then you can't download it to your own computer. You need some sort of infrastructure in place to do that. And it's one of the more technically challenging parts for people to set up when they're first learning how to do this. In these experiments, people are often playing something that is, slightly gamified, testing their memory or something like that. And when they finish doing a particular task, we can send data off to the OSF that indicates their particular performance on that particular task. It's a simple concept, but it has broad applications. Born open data is a term that I believe was coined by Jeff Rauter, a cognitive scientist. And the idea is to make the data available at the moment it is collected. And this is sort of like maximally transparent in terms of data acquisition and what an experiment is producing. On top of that, it also has this nice benefit that it removes a step for us in the process, right? Like if the data is just there on OSF, then it's there. And when we go to share our stuff, it's not another thing that we have to do.
It started when I got to work, and 5 days in, I'm like, hi, I'm Jason. Do you have a list of all your projects and PIs? I'm a very opinionated guy, and I want to do the right thing once and not repeat myself, right? And so you might be surprised to know that it wasn't the most forthcoming with having a list, right? And so we had these fact sheets that we had to do. We had to update them. And so it was a Microsoft doc file that got sent around, and then there was just back and forth between comms and scientists. And I was told, well, comms has a very particular format that they don't want to change. And then I sat next to comms. Like literally, this would be the part where I'm like, and then here's Audrey. And she was like, oh yeah, I don't care. Let's make it way better. And so just like I do with my resume, I wanted to automate it. So you save the data in a central standardized form and source, and then you use technology to make those artifacts. And so I want to focus on the data, the research, the science, and what it means. And I want to have an automatically generated PDF. I want to have an automatically generated presentation or website. Like an example, and I can put in the chat, is one of our outputs is research.ornl.gov. And that's a catalog of what we have so far. And so it's like cute. So within the lab, we have these distributed buckets, we call them, where we have 8 directorates. And so each directorate got a bucket. And the directorates, can have their researchers maintain literally a JSON file that composes or contains all of the information of their associated research. And then once that's merged into main, it can be then included into the larger catalog. It can be included to use to make all those other artifacts and stuff like that. And so that's within the lab. And then it's federated to be expanded to all of the lab. And the buckets, by the way, I literally have one on my GitHub page. Like I have a GitHub repository for my own things. We're not going to add it, but the point is, if Orno wanted to, they could. And so we're totally portable, trying to be this distributed work on commodity hardware type thing. Laser focusing on what you were asking on, like how people can use it. If you're not in the lab, anybody can use it anywhere, and that's why we open sourced it. So if you have Cargo install Acorn CLI, and then you have all the power and prompts of the tools. And then not even stopping there is working with Fuda and Daniel, and part of writing in like Acorn's written in Rust. One of the things that we're doing is we're going to output and export a Python package in addition to our so Acorn is a CLI, is a command line tool that can run on CI and your desktop. It has built on a library that is exported as a crate on Rust for Rust. There's a crate on Rust and will soon be a package on PyPy, so that, for example, OSF can use it on their backend, because OSF uses a Django Python backend, right? And so I would love for them to rewrite it in Rust, but I know that's not going to happen, especially since they just rewrote some things. And so we're meeting them halfway and trying to collaborate with the COS to integrate like that. So I'm sorry I got a little excited, but I just there's so many ways, but we really want to use this functionality, this automation, this technology, without having to make a special use case for each one. We want to use the central goodness, which is kind of a recurring theme. So Center for Open Science, it's a central focus, right? It's a bulletin board of sorts. There are a handful of organizations, not really that many, but there's only one that's explicitly Center for Open Science, right? And so someone's got to be the flag bearer for the movement. We've talked a lot about community building and stuff like that. So there's that, right? And then there's obviously the call, which was an opportunity. It is funny, due to kind of funding time restrictions, we ended up funding ourselves. So a little pay to play kind of thing just to be involved. I think it's important for an entity like the federally funded Research and Development Center to actively engage in these things. And so that belief is what drives, for me, me and Audrey. And so it was an opportunity with the right singular thing. And then lastly, OSF is amazing, right? Even if you were to look, you won't see anything on OSF from me yet, but even the idea of just the idea of pre-registration is very powerful. And so we got to go somewhere, and it's a good place to start, I think. And so far, so good.
I think what OSF is this amazing sort of general tool, right? It's not tailored to a particular discipline. It's not tailored to a particular use case. It is a place where lots of different ways of communicating and being open about science can exist. And I think what is really exciting to me about something like the open source ecosystem is that, your all job is to do this general tool, but there's lots of interesting cases where we could do things that are specific to, say, behavioral researchers running experiments online that really aren't, your thing, but with this ability to create open source contributions and to integrate with an API and things like that. Now we can build those things, and we can turn this general purpose tool into something that has this option to tailor it really specifically to use cases and help automate and make those use cases a lot more powerful.